Mall manager mocks teen in LGBTQ plus hat, then learns his mom owns the mall. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. Jamie adjusted his rainbow hat nervously as he stepped into the brightly lit mall. The familiar hum of chatter, the jingling of shop bells, and the faint aroma of cinnamon buns from the food court greeted him. This mall had been his favorite hangout spot for as long as he could remember, a place where he and his friends shared countless laughs and made lasting memories. But today felt different. He couldn't shake the unease he felt, as if something was about to go wrong. The rainbow hat Jamie wore was a simple accessory, but to him it was much more. It was a quiet statement, a small way of expressing pride in who he was. For years, Jamie had struggled with accepting himself, and this hat represented a milestone, a personal victory in a world that often felt unforgiving. Still, the nerves lingered. He knew not everyone was as accepting as his close friends and family. As Jamie walked through the mall, his gaze flicked between the shop windows and the bustling crowd. He spotted his friends near the arcade and waved, his nervousness easing slightly. But before he could reach them, a stern voice stopped him in his tracks. "Hey, you!" The sharp tone cut through the air, and Jamie turned to see a man in a crisp navy suit striding toward him. It was Mr. Reed, the mall manager. Jamie had seen Mr. Reed around before, barking orders at employees and scolding teenagers for loitering. He was known for his no-nonsense attitude and rigid rules, but Jamie had never interacted with him directly. Until now. "Yes?" Jamie asked cautiously, his fingers gripping the straps of his backpack. Mr. Reed stopped a few feet away, his eyes narrowing as he took in Jamie's rainbow hat. "What's with the hat?" he demanded, his voice dripping with disdain. Jamie blinked, taken aback. "It's just a hat. It's inappropriate," Mr. Reed snapped. "This is a family mall, not a place for—" He paused, his words trailing off, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Jamie's cheeks burned with humiliation. "There's nothing wrong with my hat," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Mr. Reed scoffed. "You're drawing unnecessary attention to yourself. Take it off or you'll have to leave." Jamie's heart pounded in his chest. He glanced around, noticing the curious stares of passers-by. His first instinct was to comply to avoid further confrontation. But then he remembered why he wore the hat in the first place. To stand tall, to be proud of who he was. "No," Jamie said, his voice steady now. "I'm not taking it off." Mr. Reed's eyes flashed with irritation. "Fine. But if I see you causing any trouble, you're out." Jamie watched as the manager walked away, his shoulders tense and his fists clenched. The encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth, but he refused to let it ruin his day. He took a deep breath, straightened his hat, and continued toward his friends. "Hey, Jamie," called Ella, one of his best friends, as he approached. She immediately noticed his unsettled expression. "Are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Jamie forced a smile. "I'm fine. Just ran into the mall manager. He wasn't too happy about my hat." "What?" Ella's jaw dropped. "What did he say?" Jamie shrugged, trying to downplay the encounter. "He told me it was inappropriate and that I should take it off." "That's ridiculous," another friend, Max, chimed in. "It's just a hat. What's his problem?" Jamie hesitated, unsure how much to share. "I think he has a problem with people like me." Ella placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to take that from anyone, Jamie. You have every right to be here, just like anyone else." Jamie nodded, grateful for his friend's support. "Thanks, guys. Let's just enjoy the day." Despite his resolve, Jamie couldn't shake the lingering discomfort from his encounter with Mr. Reed. The man's words replayed in his mind, each repetition fueling a mix of anger and sadness. He didn't understand why some people couldn't just let others be. Why did it matter so much what he wore or who he was? Later that evening, Jamie sat at the kitchen table, sharing the day's events with his mom, Carla. Carla was his rock, strong, supportive, and fiercely protective. She listened intently as Jamie recounted his interaction with Mr. Reed, her expression shifting from concern to quiet anger. "He had no right to say that to you," Carla said firmly. "You've done nothing wrong." "I know," Jamie said, his voice tinged with frustration. "But it's hard to stand up to someone like him. He's the mall manager and I'm just me." Carla reached across the table, taking Jamie's hand in hers. "You are so much more than just you. You're brave, kind, and unapologetically yourself. Don't ever let anyone make you feel small." Jamie smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mom. I just wish people like him could see that." Carla's jaw tightened, a glimmer of determination in her eyes. Maybe it's time someone showed him. Unbeknownst to Jamie, Carla had a history with the mall that even he didn't fully understand. Years ago, she had partnered with a real estate firm to invest in commercial properties, and the mall was one of her most successful ventures. She rarely spoke about it, preferring to focus on her family rather than her business endeavors. But now she realized it might be time to step into the spotlight. Carla spent the next day gathering information about Mr. Reed. She contacted the mall's management company, reviewed employee feedback, and even spoke to a few shop owners. The picture that emerged was troubling. Mr. Reed's behavior toward Jamie wasn't an isolated incident. He had a history of treating people unfairly, particularly those who didn't fit his narrow view of what was acceptable. Armed with this knowledge, Carla began formulating a plan. She knew she couldn't confront Mr. Reed outright. Not yet. But she also knew she couldn't let his actions go unchecked. Meanwhile, Jamie was finding strength in unexpected places. After sharing his story with his friends, he began hearing from others who had faced similar treatment from Mr. Reed. A teenage girl who had been told her outfit was too distracting, a young man who had been scolded for holding hands with his boyfriend, a single mother who had been berated for letting her child play too loudly in the food court. Each story added to Jamie's resolve. He realized that standing up to Mr. Reed wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been made to feel unwelcome or unworthy. "We should do something," Ella said during their next hangout. "Like a protest or a sit-in." Jamie hesitated. "I don't know. What if it just makes things worse? Or what if it makes things better?" Max countered. "You're not alone, Jamie. We're with you." Jamie looked at his friends, their faces filled with determination. For the first time since his encounter with Mr. Reed, he felt a spark of hope. By the time the weekend rolled around, word of Jamie's experience had spread. A small but growing group of teens gathered at the mall, wearing rainbow hats, pins, and shirts in a show of solidarity. They weren't loud or disruptive. They simply walked through the mall, smiling at passersby and supporting one another. Mr. Reed, however, was not pleased. He watched the group from his office, his expression darkening with each passing moment. "This is unacceptable," he muttered, storming out to confront them. As he approached the group, Jamie stood at the forefront, his heart pounding but his chin held high. He knew this moment would be a turning point, not just for him but for everyone watching. Jamie's palms were sweaty as Mr. Reed approached the group. The mall manager's face was a mix of anger and disdain, his eyes zeroing in on Jamie's rainbow hat as if it personally offended him. Jamie could feel the weight of the moment, the curious stares of shoppers and the supportive presence of his friends behind him. He took a deep breath, determined not to back down. "What's going on here?" Mr. Reed demanded, his voice sharp enough to make a few people nearby flinch. "This is a mall, not a political rally." Jamie stepped forward, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "We're not causing any trouble. We're just here, like everyone else." Mr. Reed's gaze narrowed. "Don't play coy with me, kid. You know exactly what you're doing. You're making a scene." Jamie blinked, confused. "How are we making a scene? We're just walking around, shopping like anyone else." "Don't get smart with me," Mr. Reed snapped, his tone laced with condescension. "This mall is a family-friendly environment. That hat of yours," he gestured dismissively at the rainbow cap, "is inappropriate. It's drawing attention for all the wrong reasons." The crowd around them began to grow, shoppers pausing to watch the confrontation. Jamie's friends stepped closer, forming a protective semicircle around him. Ella crossed her arms, her glare fixed on Mr. Reed. "You can't just single people out because of what they're wearing," she said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "That's discrimination." Mr. Reed's face flushed red. "This isn't discrimination. I'm simply maintaining the standards of this establishment." "By targeting a teenager for wearing a hat?" Max interjected. "That's ridiculous." The tension in the air was palpable. Jamie could feel his heart racing, but he refused to let fear take over. "I have every right to be here," he said firmly, his voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd. "And so does everyone else. We're not breaking any rules. We're just being ourselves." As Mr. Reed opened his mouth to retort, a new voice cut through the noise. A calm, authoritative voice that carried a quiet strength. "Is there a problem here?" The crowd parted to reveal Carla, Jamie's mom, standing tall and composed. Her eyes flicked between Mr. Reed and Jamie, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. Mr. Reed straightened, clearly caught off guard by her presence. "This doesn't concern you, ma'am," he said dismissively. "I'm handling a situation with these kids." "It does concern me," Carla replied evenly, stepping closer. "That's my son you're speaking to." Mr. Reed's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recovered. "Then perhaps you should teach your son about appropriate behavior in public spaces." Carla's jaw tightened, but her voice remained calm. "My son isn't the one causing a scene. You are. And I'd like to know why you feel the need to police what he's wearing." The crowd murmured in agreement, emboldened by Carla's calm yet firm demeanor. Mr. Reed, however, wasn't backing down. "I'm simply enforcing the mall's policies," he said, though his tone lacked the confidence it had carried moments earlier. "We have a reputation to uphold, and how does targeting a teenager for wearing a rainbow hat uphold that reputation?" Carla asked, her voice sharper now. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like blatant discrimination." Mr. Reed's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. He seemed to realize that the crowd was no longer on his side. Shoppers were shaking their heads, whispering to one another, and even recording the interaction on their phones. Jamie, emboldened by his mom's support, stepped forward again. "You don't get to decide what's appropriate for me," he said, his voice clear and strong. "And you don't get to make people feel like they don't belong just because they're different." The confrontation ended with Mr. Reed muttering something about needing to review policies and retreating to his office, his shoulders hunched under the weight of the crowd's disapproval. As he walked away, a few people clapped, and Jamie's friends cheered quietly. Carla turned to Jamie, her expression softening. "Are you okay?" Jamie nodded, though his legs felt shaky. "Thanks, Mom. I didn't think you'd be here. I came to do some shopping, but then I saw what was happening," Carla explained, brushing a hand over his shoulder. "You handled yourself well, Jamie. I'm proud of you." That evening, back at home, Carla sat down with Jamie to talk about what had happened. "You shouldn't have had to go through that," she said, her tone serious. "But I'm glad you stood your ground." Jamie shrugged, his expression thoughtful. "It's not just about me, though. Mr. Reed's done this to other people, too. I've heard stories, people being yelled at, told to leave, just because they didn't fit his idea of what's acceptable." Carla's eyes narrowed. "If that's true, it's a bigger problem than just today. And it's one we need to address." "What can we do?" Jamie asked. "He's the mall manager. He's in charge." Carla hesitated, debating whether to reveal the truth. Finally, she said, "There's something you should know, Jamie. I own the mall." Jamie's jaw dropped. "Wait, what?" Carla smiled faintly. "I invested in the property years ago, but I've always kept a low profile. I let the management company handle day-to-day operations. But now, I think it's time I got involved." The next day, Carla made a series of calls. She spoke to the management company, reviewed policies, and arranged a private meeting with Mr. Reed. She wanted to handle the situation carefully but firmly, ensuring that the mall became a place where everyone felt welcome. When Mr. Reed arrived at the meeting, he was clearly unaware of Carla's role. "Ms. Roberts, I don't see why you're so concerned about a minor incident," he said dismissively. "It's not like this is a major issue." Carla raised an eyebrow. Not a major issue? Mr. Reed, your actions have not only alienated visitors but also damaged the mall's reputation. And as the owner of this mall, I take that very seriously. Mr. Reed froze, his face turning pale. Why, you're the owner? Yes, Carla said, her tone icy. And I'm giving you a choice. You can either apologize to my son and the community and commit to meaningful change, or you can look for employment elsewhere. Mr. Reed stammered, clearly caught off guard. I didn't realize. Of course I'll apologize. It was a misunderstanding. Carla's gaze didn't waver. This isn't just about an apology, Mr. Reed. It's about creating a culture of respect and inclusivity. I'll be monitoring your actions closely. If I see any more instances of discrimination, your time here will be over. Mr. Reed nodded quickly, his bravado completely gone. Understood, ma'am. I'll do better. Carla stood, signaling the end of the meeting. For your sake, I hope so. As Carla walked out of the office, she felt a mix of satisfaction and determination. There was still work to be done, but this was a step in the right direction. She knew that Jamie and others like him deserved a place where they could feel safe and accepted, and she was going to make sure they had it. Carla left the meeting with Mr. Reed feeling resolute. The mall, her investment and a cornerstone of the community, would no longer be a place where anyone could face ridicule or discrimination. As she walked through its polished halls, Carla observed the crowd bustling through stores, chatting, and enjoying their day. It strengthened her resolve. This was a place meant to bring people together, not divide them. At home, Jamie was waiting anxiously to hear about the outcome of her meeting. When Carla walked through the door, he immediately stood up from the couch. How did it go, Mom? Did you talk to him? Carla smiled and sat down next to him, resting a hand on his shoulder. I did, and he knows exactly where I stand now. Mr. Reed has agreed to apologize and commit to changing how he runs things. And Jamie, she added, her voice firm, if I see any sign that he's falling back into old patterns, he's out. Jamie exhaled, a weight lifting from his chest. Thanks, Mom. It's just, I didn't know you owned the mall. Why didn't you tell me? Carla hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I didn't want it to affect how you saw things. I wanted you to see the world as it is, not how it might seem with me in the background. But when I saw what happened to you, I knew I had to step in. Jamie nodded slowly, his respect for his mom deepening. You didn't just step in, you stood up for me. That means everything. Carla hugged him tightly. I'll always stand up for you, Jamie. Always. The following weekend, Carla organized a community meeting at the mall, inviting tenants, employees, and visitors to discuss their experiences and share ideas for improving inclusivity. Flyers went up, social media posts spread the word, and soon the event drew a diverse crowd eager to participate. Jamie attended the meeting with his friends, all wearing their rainbow gear proudly. The mall's food court had been rearranged with rows of chairs and a small stage where Carla stood, microphone in hand. Thank you all for being here, Carla began, her voice steady but passionate. This mall belongs to everyone, and it's my responsibility to ensure that it's a space where everyone feels welcome. I've heard stories over the past week, stories that show we have work to do, but I believe we can do better, together. She turned to Jamie, who was sitting in the front row. My son, Jamie, taught me the importance of standing up for what's right. He reminded me that change starts with one voice but grows through a community. The crowd erupted into applause as Jamie blushed, his friends cheering beside him. After Carla's speech, attendees were invited to share their own stories and ideas. A teenage girl named Sophia stepped up to the microphone, her voice trembling at first but growing stronger with each word. I used to love coming here, she said. But one time, Mr. Reed told me my outfit was too distracting and that I should dress more appropriately. I felt humiliated. I stopped coming for a long time, even though this was my favorite place to meet friends. Another man, holding hands with his partner, spoke next. We were told to tone it down once just for holding hands. We weren't doing anything wrong. We just wanted to shop like everyone else. Each story painted a clearer picture of the culture that had taken root under Mr. Reed's leadership. Carla listened intently, taking notes and promising to address every concern. Jamie, sitting quietly, realized just how many people had been affected. It wasn't just him. This was bigger than he had imagined. As the meeting ended, Carla announced a series of changes aimed at fostering a more inclusive environment. She introduced a new code of conduct for the mall that emphasized respect and zero tolerance for discrimination. She also promised diversity and sensitivity training for all mall employees, starting with Mr. Reed. Jamie felt a swell of pride as he watched his mom lead the charge. But he also felt a responsibility to do his part. After the meeting, he approached Carla. "Mom, I want to help," he said. "I don't want to just stand by and let you do all the work." Carla smiled, her eyes softening. "You're already helping, Jamie. Just by being brave and speaking up, you've inspired so many people. But if you want to do more, we'll find a way." Over the next few weeks, Jamie and his friends became ambassadors for the mall's new inclusivity initiative. They handed out flyers, spoke to shoppers about the changes, and even started a social media campaign to promote the mall as a welcoming space for everyone. The campaign gained traction quickly, with posts featuring stories of people who had felt excluded in the past but now felt seen and valued. The hashtag #MyMallMyPride trended locally, drawing positive attention to the mall and its efforts. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed began his diversity training, led by a professional facilitator Carla had hired. At first, he was resistant, sitting stiffly in his chair and crossing his arms as the facilitator spoke about the importance of empathy and understanding. But as the sessions continued, something began to shift. Hearing the stories of people he had dismissed or judged opened Mr. Reed's eyes to the impact of his actions. He realized that his strict, outdated views had hurt not just individuals but the entire community. One day, after a particularly eye-opening session, Mr. Reed approached Carla in her office. His demeanor was different, less defensive, more reflective. "Ms. Roberts," he began, his voice hesitant, "I wanted to thank you for giving me this chance. I've been thinking a lot about what I've done, and I realize now how much harm I caused. I'm truly sorry." Carla studied him carefully, searching for sincerity in his words. "Apologies are a start, Mr. Reed, but actions speak louder than words. What are you prepared to do to make things right?" Mr. Reed straightened, his jaw tightening with determination. "I want to be part of the solution. I'd like to work with the team on the inclusivity initiative, and I want to help rebuild trust with the community." Carla nodded slowly. "That's a good first step. But remember, this isn't about earning forgiveness. It's about creating lasting change." As Mr. Reed began his journey of redemption, the atmosphere at the mall shifted noticeably. Employees felt more valued, visitors felt more welcome, and the community began to see the mall as a symbol of progress and unity. Jamie, too, noticed the change. On one of his regular visits, he saw Mr. Reed speaking kindly to a group of teens who had gathered near the food court. It was a stark contrast to the man who had once mocked Jamie for his hat. "Hey, Jamie," Ella called, pulling him from his thoughts. She and Max were waiting near the arcade, both wearing matching rainbow pins. "You coming?" Jamie grinned and jogged over, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the mall was truly his space, a place where he could be himself without fear or judgment. As the weeks went by, the changes at the mall became more evident. The once tense atmosphere had been replaced by one of warmth and inclusion. Shoppers of all backgrounds felt welcome, and employees spoke of a newfound sense of respect and camaraderie. The mall was thriving, not just as a commercial space but as a true community hub. Jamie watched these changes with a mix of pride and amazement. He knew his mom had spearheaded the efforts, but he also felt that he and his friends had played an important role. Together, they had turned a painful experience into a movement for positive change. One Saturday morning, Jamie and his friends decided to visit the mall to see the progress firsthand. As they walked through the entrance, they were greeted by a vibrant display near the food court. A large banner read, "Celebrating Diversity and Inclusion," and tables were set up with representatives from local organizations promoting equality and support. Ella nudged Jamie. "Looks like our little protest turned into a full-blown celebration," she said with a grin. Jamie laughed, feeling a swell of pride. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. As they wandered through the displays, they were approached by Mr. Reed. Jamie's heart skipped a beat, but he quickly noticed that the mall manager's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the stern, judgmental figure who had confronted him weeks earlier. In his place stood a man who seemed genuinely humbled and eager to make amends. "Jamie," Mr. Reed began, his tone soft but sincere, "I owe you an apology. My behavior toward you and others was completely unacceptable. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Jamie blinked, taken aback by the directness of the apology. For a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. But then he saw the honesty in Mr. Reed's eyes, and he felt the weight of his own anger begin to lift. "Thank you," Jamie said, his voice steady. "I appreciate that." Mr. Reed nodded, his expression one of gratitude and relief. "I've been working to change, to understand how my actions affected people. And I want you to know that your courage inspired me to start that process." Jamie felt a lump rise in his throat. He had never imagined that standing up for himself would lead to something so transformative. Not just for him, but for the entire mall. Later that day, Jamie met up with his mom in the mall's office. Carla was reviewing plans for an upcoming community event, her desk covered in colorful flyers and notes. "Hey, Mom," Jamie said, sitting down across from her. "Guess who apologized to me today?" Carla looked up, her expression curious. "Who?" "Mr. Reed," Jamie said. "He actually seemed sincere. He said he's been working to change." Carla leaned back in her chair, a small smile forming on her lips. "That's good to hear. I've been keeping a close eye on him, and I think he's starting to understand the impact of his actions." Jamie nodded. "It's weird. A part of me wanted to stay mad at him, but I don't know. Seeing him try to do better made me realize that maybe people can change. They can," Carla agreed. "But it takes effort, and it takes people like you who are brave enough to call them out and hold them accountable." As the weeks turned into months, the mall continued to flourish under its new ethos of inclusivity. Carla's leadership, combined with the efforts of Jamie, his friends, and the wider community, had transformed it into a place where everyone felt they belonged. The mall hosted events celebrating diversity, including cultural festivals, workshops, and open mic nights where people shared their stories. Jamie and his friends became regular participants, often helping to organize and promote the events. One evening, as Jamie stood on stage at an open mic event, he looked out at the crowd and felt a sense of belonging he hadn't experienced before. The audience was a mix of people, young and old, from different backgrounds, all gathered to celebrate each other. Jamie took a deep breath and began to speak. "A few months ago, I didn't feel like I belonged here," he said. "I thought this mall wasn't a place for people like me. But today, standing here, I see how much has changed. And I see how much we can accomplish when we come together." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jamie felt a warmth spread through him. He knew that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had fought to make the mall a better place. Meanwhile, Mr. Reed continued his journey of redemption. He worked closely with Carla and the mall staff to implement new policies and programs aimed at fostering inclusion. He also became an advocate for change, speaking openly about his past mistakes and the lessons he had learned. At first, some people were skeptical of his transformation, but over time, his actions spoke louder than words. He treated everyone with respect, listened to their concerns, and went out of his way to make amends. Slowly but surely, he earned the trust of the community. One day, Mr. Reed approached Jamie and Carla as they were walking through the mall. "I wanted to thank you both," he said. "You didn't just hold me accountable, you gave me the chance to do better. And I'll always be grateful for that." Carla smiled. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Mr. Reed. It's what you do with it that matters." The turning point for Mr. Reed came during a town hall meeting where he addressed the community. Standing in front of a packed room, he spoke candidly about his journey. "I used to think that running a mall was just about enforcing rules and maintaining order," he said. "But I've learned that it's so much more than that. It's about creating a space where people feel welcome, where they can be themselves without fear or judgment. And I'm committed to making sure this mall is that kind of place." The audience applauded, and Jamie couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't easy to admit to mistakes, let alone work to change them. But Mr. Reed was proving that it was possible. Months after the transformation of the mall began, it was clear that the efforts were paying off. What had once been an ordinary shopping center was now a symbol of inclusivity and community. Families, teenagers, and even senior citizens flocked to the mall, not just to shop but to connect and celebrate diversity. Carla's vision had come to life, and Jamie felt immense pride knowing he had played a part in it. One Saturday afternoon, Jamie and his friends gathered at the food court. The atmosphere was lively, with the buzz of chatter and laughter filling the air. The group had planned to attend a workshop on creative self-expression being held at the mall's newly established community center. "I still can't believe how much this place has changed," Ella said, taking a sip of her smoothie. "It's like a completely different mall." "Yeah," Max agreed. "Remember when we used to avoid Mr. Reed like the plague? Now he actually smiles at people." Jamie chuckled. "It's weird, but kind of nice. I mean, if someone like him can change, maybe there's hope for everyone." As they finished their snacks and headed toward the community center, Jamie noticed a familiar figure standing near one of the displays. It was Mr. Reed, speaking with a group of visitors and gesturing toward the display with genuine enthusiasm. The display featured a timeline of the mall's transformation, highlighting milestones like the implementation of the inclusivity policy, the diversity training for staff, and the community events that had brought people together. Mr. Reed caught Jamie's eye and smiled, giving him a small nod of acknowledgement. Jamie returned the gesture, feeling a warmth he hadn't expected. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. He wasn't sure if he was ready to fully forgive, but it was something close to understanding. Mr. Reed had put in the work to change, and Jamie could respect that. The workshop at the community center was a resounding success. Participants of all ages gathered to paint, write poetry, and share their stories. Jamie and his friends joined a group working on a mural, each person adding their own unique touch to the colorful masterpiece. As Jamie painted, he felt a sense of freedom and joy he hadn't experienced in a long time. This was what the mall had become, a place where everyone could express themselves without fear of judgment. After the workshop, Carla joined Jamie in the community center. She had been busy overseeing the day's events but made sure to check in with him whenever she could. "How's it going, kiddo?" she asked, admiring the mural he had helped create. Jamie grinned, wiping his hands on a paper towel. "It's amazing, Mom. I can't believe how much has changed here. Feels like home." Carla's heart swelled with pride. "That's exactly what I wanted it to be. A home for everyone. And you helped make that happen, Jamie." Jamie looked at her, his expression serious. "You did most of the work, Mom. I just spoke up." "And that's where it all started," Carla said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Never underestimate the power of your voice. Can change the world." Meanwhile, Mr. Reed continued to reflect on his journey. He had started as a man who enforced rules with little regard for how they affected people. But the events of the past months had reshaped his perspective. He now saw his role not as a gatekeeper but as a steward of the community. One evening, as the mall was winding down for the night, Mr. Reed found himself standing outside the community center, staring at the mural Jamie and his friends had helped create. It depicted a diverse array of people holding hands, with a rainbow arching across a bright blue sky. At the center of the mural were the words, "Together, we rise." Mr. Reed felt a lump in his throat. He thought about all the people he had judged unfairly, all the moments he had missed to make someone feel welcome instead of pushing them away. He realized how much he owed to Jamie, Carla, and the entire community for giving him a second chance. Determined to continue his journey of redemption, Mr. Reed approached Carla with an idea. "Ms. Roberts," he said one morning, "I've been thinking about how I can contribute more to the community. I'd like to organize an event. A day dedicated to celebrating the voices that have shaped this mall." Carla raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of event?" "Something like a festival," Mr. Reed explained. "We could have performances, storytelling, and workshops. It would be a way to honor the people who've made this place what it is today." Carla smiled, impressed by his initiative. "That sounds like a wonderful idea. Let's make it happen." The planning for the festival began immediately, with Jamie and his friends volunteering to help. They brainstormed ideas, reached out to local performers, and spread the word through social media. The excitement was contagious, and soon the entire community was buzzing with anticipation. On the day of the festival, the mall was transformed into a vibrant celebration of diversity and inclusion. There were stages set up for performances, booths showcasing local artists and businesses, and activities for families and children. The air was filled with music, laughter, and the aroma of delicious food from various cultures. Jamie and his friends spent the day running from one event to the next, their faces lit with joy. Ella tried her hand at a drumming circle, while Max joined a dance workshop. Jamie found himself drawn to the storytelling corner, where people shared personal stories of resilience, love, and acceptance. As the festival reached its peak, Carla took the stage to address the crowd. She looked out at the sea of faces, people of all ages, backgrounds, and identities, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice ringing out over the crowd. "This festival is a celebration of everything we've accomplished together. It's a reminder that when we stand up for what's right, when we listen to one another, and when we come together as a community, we can create something truly beautiful." The crowd erupted into applause, and Carla gestured for Jamie to join her on stage. He hesitated for a moment, but the encouraging cheers of his friends gave him the push he needed. As he stood beside his mom, the applause grew even louder. "This is my son, Jamie," Carla said, her voice filled with pride. "He's the reason we're here today." His courage to speak up inspired this change, and I couldn't be prouder of him. Jamie felt his cheeks flush, but he also felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. He took the microphone, his hands trembling slightly. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady despite his nerves. "I never thought something as simple as a hat could lead to all of this, but it just goes to show how powerful our voices can be. So, if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: never be afraid to be yourself, and never be afraid to stand up for what's right." The crowd cheered, their applause echoing through the mall. Jamie looked out at the faces before him, friends, family, and strangers who had become allies, and felt a sense of belonging he had never known before.